Shirley Brant was a 49-year-old mother of four and a successful real estate broker in North Miami Beach, Florida. She was known as an extremely driven businesswoman who had established one of the most successful real estate agencies in the area. On June 13, 1986, Shirley's life was cut tragically short. Shirley was working in her office, the Brant Realty Corporation, and speaking on the phone when two strangers walked in. The men were conspicuously well dressed, wearing dress pants and collared shirts, perhaps to pass as clients and avoid arousing suspicion. An employee in the office later told police she heard Shirley suddenly scream, then saw one of the men attempting to wrestle the phone away from her. A shot rang out, and Shirley Brant was struck at point-blank range. The two assailants grabbed Shirley's purse, escaping with cash and her credit cards, before fleeing the scene. Critically wounded, Shirley was rushed to hospital, but she succumbed to her injuries shortly after arrival. North Miami Beach police initially launched an intensive investigation in the wake of the slaying. Investigators canvassed the area and even distributed thousands of flyers with the perpetrator's description in hopes of generating leads. The crime appeared to be a robbery turned slaying, and the fact that Shirley's credit cards were stolen but never used eliminated one potential trail for detectives to follow. Crucially, police did recover fingerprints from the scene, and keep this in mind, because this isn't a case that will be solved by cutting-edge forensic science. However, at the time in 1986, those latent prints were not entered into any automated database. According to North Miami Beach Police, the prints didn't meet certain criteria for submission to the automated fingerprint identification system back then. In the 1980s, forensic technology and databases were far more limited than today, so the prints remained on file but unmatched. With no immediate hits on suspects and scant physical evidence beyond the unusable fingerprints, the investigation struggled and months passed with no updates. Despite the Brant family's persistent push for answers, the case gradually went cold as the leads dried up, and one by one the original detectives retired. Shirley's family never forgot the tragedy, and they never stopped seeking justice. Her husband, local dentist Dr. Lawrence Brant, was especially resolute. He spent a fortune hiring private investigators to ensure no stone was unturned, but these efforts appear to have come to nothing, aside from keeping the case on police radar. It turns out this consistent attention on Shirley's case would pay dividends, but not until many years down the line. And then, just like that, nearly 40 years had passed. In 2024, the long-dormant case was revived by having a fresh look at the evidence with an old set of eyes. The North Miami Beach Police Department's Cold Case Unit launched a renewed investigation into Shirley Brant's slaying. Notably, they brought two retired detectives who had worked on the original case, Sergeant Pamela Denham and Sergeant Yvette Darden. These seasoned investigators volunteered to pore over the old evidence, determined to crack one of the city's longest-running unsolved cases. During the cold case review, Denham, Darden, and the team re-examined the latent fingerprints collected at the crime scene. This time, using modern forensic technology, they submitted the prints to the National Fingerprint Database. In March 2025, a stunning result came back. The prints from Shirley's office matched an individual's records. After decades of uncertainty, police had a name. The fingerprint identified Jeffrey Taylor, a 64-year-old man living in Liberty City, Miami. Taylor was 26 years old at the time of Shirley Brant's slaying. At the press conference announcing the arrest, the North Miami Beach police chief described Taylor as a, quote, career criminal with a long history of offenses. Back in 1986, Taylor's name had never come up in the Brant investigation. He wasn't an acquaintance of Shirley's, and the robbery appeared to be a random attack. Police allege that Jeffrey Taylor was the man who pulled the trigger on that fateful day in 1986. According to investigators, Taylor and his accomplice had burst into Shirley's office intending to rob her. When Shirley resisted by refusing to hang up the phone and tried to get help, a struggle ensued and Taylor fired the shot. After the shooting, the two men grabbed what they could, cash and credit cards, and bolted, leaving Shirley mortally wounded on the office floor. For nearly 4 decades, those men remained unidentified, but now, at least one of them had a face and a name. The second suspect, however, has never been identified, and police have affirmed that the investigation remains open as they continue to hunt for the other man involved. Some have speculated that Taylor will hold back this information as leverage, given the severity of the crime he's accused of, and given that the existence of an accomplice is confirmed. On April 24, 2025, a team of officers moved to finally bring Jeffrey Taylor into custody. He was arrested and charged with second-degree slaying in Shirley Brant's passing. Because this was an open warrant on a case of this nature, the court ordered that Taylor be held without bond. Nearly 40 years after Shirley's life was taken, the accused perpetrator will now face justice in a courtroom. For the time being, however, Taylor remains innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video. Also be sure to check out my other channels for more content related to unsolved mysteries in history. On September 23, 1991, drivers along a quiet stretch of Neptune Road in St. Cloud, Florida, stumbled upon a horrifying scene. They discovered the body of 27-year-old Julia Wilbanks lying in a ditch by the roadside. Julia, a single mother, had been stabbed approximately 17 times, including fatal wounds to her heart. The attack was vicious and personal, and by the time help arrived, she had already been dead for over 24 hours. A group of passing motorists finally noticed her body and flagged down a police officer, bringing an end to the lonely final chapter of her life. The violent death of this young mother shocked the community and set in motion a massive police investigation. Detectives scoured the area for evidence and interviewed anyone who might have information, but leads were scarce. One crucial piece of evidence did emerge: a drop of blood on Wilbanks's denim shorts that didn't belong to her. Investigators believed this blood came from the perpetrator responsible for this cruel act, and developed a rudimentary DNA profile from the sample. Little did the perp know that this single drop would be a calling card throughout time, unlocked with future technology. Throughout the 1990s, they compared this DNA profile against multiple potential suspects, hoping for a match, but each comparison came up empty. Despite the diligent work of investigators, this hard work never led to any arrests in those early years. By the late 1990s, the Julia Wilbanks investigation had gone cold, and there were no new leads and no publicly known suspects. Thankfully, investigators preserved the evidence, including the offender's DNA, with the hope that someday technology or new information might revive the investigation. In 2012, more than 2 decades after the attack, St. Cloud detectives took a fresh look at the cold case using new forensic tools. They reopened the investigation and submitted the unknown DNA profile to a company specializing in genetic genealogy. Unfortunately, at the time, this technology was in its infancy, and nothing could be done with the sample. However, by the early 2020s, things had drastically changed, and this technology was now rapidly solving cases around the world. In 2025, the authorities again used the DNA profile in hopes of solving the case. They searched through national public DNA databases for any familial links to the mystery profile. The idea is that even if the perpetrator had never given a DNA sample to police, one of their relatives might have uploaded DNA data to a public genealogy site. This would then provide the beginning of a network of clues that could be used to narrow down the suspect. Nearly 33 years after Julia's slaying, the persistence of the investigators finally paid off big time. The cold case team had finally zeroed in on a name: Gene Stuller. Gene Stuller, a 72-year-old man living in Apopka, Florida, suddenly found himself under the microscope of investigators in 2025. It turned out that back in 1991, Stuller had lived near Julia's last known residence in Kissimmee, uncomfortably close to the victim's home at the time of the slaying. This discovery added a context to the DNA match, suggesting that the suspect might not have been a random stranger at all, but perhaps someone who had even known Julia. Once he was identified as a person of interest, detectives moved quickly to confirm the DNA evidence. In March 2025, undercover officers surveilled Stuller and managed to obtain a piece of physical evidence, a discarded drinking straw that he had used and thrown away. From this item, forensic analysts extracted Stuller's DNA profile. The results were decisive. The DNA from the straw was an exact match from the DNA from the 1991 crime scene. After decades of mystery, the perpetrator's identity was backed by solid scientific proof. With DNA evidence in hand, authorities moved to finally close the case. On April 21, 2025, St. Cloud police officers arrived at Gene Stuller's home in Apopka and placed the 72-year-old under arrest. The long-running cold case had at last produced a suspect in custody. For the law enforcement officers involved, it was a moment of triumph and relief, a testament to their determination and the power of modern forensic science. In Stuller's quiet Apopka neighborhood, the arrest came as an unwelcome surprise. Neighbors who knew the elderly man were stunned to learn that he was accused of a brutal decades-old slaying. Stuller had lived in that community for roughly 20 years, and those who interacted with him saw him as a good-natured retiree. In fact, one of his neighbors was quoted as saying after his arrest that he was, quote-unquote, a nice fella. But wait, there's more. This same neighbor also said he would miss having him around, which is an extremely questionable comment given the context. The contrast between Stuller's public persona and the crime he's accused of is stark. Police disclosed that Stuller's past criminal record was minimal, and he had no apparent history of violence. All his previous offenses were substance-related, but there was absolutely nothing to indicate the violence he was capable of. In hindsight, his relatively low-profile life may have helped him avoid suspicion for so many years, including at the time of the initial investigation. Gene Stuller has now officially been charged in connection with Julia's death. Following his arrest, he was booked into jail and continues to await further legal proceedings. Based on the present reporting, it remains unclear how he will plead in this case. The case will now move into the courts, where prosecutors will present the evidence gathered, including the DNA match. Currently, it's unclear if the accused perpetrator and Julia were acquainted with one another, and if they were, what the nature of their relationship was. Gene Stuller remains innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. On October 30th, 1984, Arkansas highway workers made a grim discovery along Interstate 40. While mowing grass near Carlisle, just outside Little Rock, they came across the body of an adult man left on the roadside. An autopsy later revealed that the man had been strangled, and his case was unsurprisingly immediately classified as a slaying. Investigators found no identification on the victim, and no immediate clues to his name, nor any clues as to the perpetrator. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, The victim remained unidentified. With no name and few leads to follow, the investigation stalled. The unknown man was recorded as a John Doe in police records, and later listed in a national database as the Lonoke County John Doe. For nearly 40 years, the man's file gathered dust, and his true identity and the story behind his death remained a painful mystery. After decades of dead ends, a fresh break came in 2024. The Arkansas State Police Cold Case Unit decided to reopen the investigation into the 1984 roadside slaying. Advances in forensic technology offered new hope for a case once thought unsolvable. In September 2024, cold case investigators submitted the victim's remains to Othram Labs, a specialized DNA testing and forensic genealogy company in Texas. For the first time in decades, there was a glimmer of hope that the victim's identity could be found. In early 2025, the DNA efforts paid off with a crucial breakthrough. On January 27, 2025, Othram Labs reported a tentative identification to the ASP. They believed the long unidentified victim was Earl James McDaniel. Along with this tentative ID came a lead. The lab had identified a possible relative of the victim in Washington state. ASP investigators, working in coordination with the Washington State Attorney General's Cold Case Unit, tracked down that relative, who turned out to be McDaniel's daughter. The woman provided her own DNA sample, which was sent to the lab for comparison. In late February 2025, the results came back, confirming the match. The John Doe was indeed Earl James McDaniel. After 4 decades of anonymity, the victim finally had his name restored. With the identification confirmed, investigators could finally piece together Earl James McDaniel's backstory. McDaniel was 53 years old at the time of his death and originally hailed from Kansas City, Missouri. His life had been turbulent, and records showed he spent time incarcerated in Washington state during the 1960s. After this, he had numerous run-ins with the law across the country in the years that followed. In the early 1980s, he was paroled from prison in Oklahoma, after which he continued moving from state to state, perhaps living as a drifter. In fact, McDaniel's last known interaction in life was with law enforcement on September 11, 1984. Police in Oskaloosa, Iowa, arrested him for drunk driving, though no further details of the case have been released at this time. After that date, McDaniel effectively vanished from official records. Just weeks later, the day before Halloween in 1984, he was found deceased in Arkansas. How he ended up strangled and dumped by an Arkansas highway so soon after his Iowa arrest is a question that still haunts investigators. Thanks to DNA and dogged investigative work, the 40-year-old mystery of the victim's identity has been solved, but a new question has taken its place. Who ended the life of Earl and why? The most common speculation is that his criminal past caught up to him and he ran afoul of a much more dangerous individual. That said, this is purely speculation at this time. The authorities have not indicated what further evidence they have from the scene, or if there are any DNA profiles which may be associated with the perpetrator.